Since the January balance slate, the Necrons have been one of the consistently outstanding armies on Warhammer Tabletop. I've seen this firsthand, and I think I've spent enough time with them to make a pretty solid list pick video. So let's get out our Gauss blasters, unchain our Catan shards, because we've got a galaxy to conquer. Welcome back to Starhammer. So just like my other list pick videos, which you should totally watch if you haven't, we are going to start with characters and work our way down. This is a 2k point list running the Hypercrypt Legion detachment, and I'll drop the model list in the description as well. Before I get into this, let me disclaim, I am not running a monolith. And don't worry, there's a good, perfectly reasonable explanation for that, because I'm running out of fucking room on my shelves. For starters, let's discuss the Hypercrypt Legion detachment rules. At the end of your opponent's turn, you can select up to X Necron units that aren't within engagement range, remove them from the field, and place them in strategic reserves. The number of units you can pick is determined by the size of your game. Incursion is up to 2, Strike Force is up to 3, and Onslaught is up to 4. This might look pretty familiar if you've played or played against a Grey Knight's army. With the Dimensional Overseer enhancement, you can bump that limit up to 1 extra unit, and that's a pretty cheap enhancement to get for 10 points. Some of the stratagems in this detachment rely on running the monolith, such as Hyperphasic Recall, which allows you to pull a unit that had a model or more destroyed out of combat, place them anywhere on the battlefield wholly within 6 inches of that monolith. That's a pretty darn good stratagem. Another is Dimensional Corridor, which allows a unit deployed via the Eternity Gate ability of the monolith to make a charge on that turn instead of just staying put. That's another really good stratagem. Monoliths are super helpful and allow you to take full advantage of your teleportation by allowing you to deploy units anywhere on the field as long as it's within 6 inches of that monolith and not within engagement range of any enemies. So while I'm not able to do that with this list, I do plan on getting one in the near future. Having a monolith is not essential to this detachment, but it certainly helps to have one. I'll also be including enhancements in the point cost for these models instead of notating them separately. So anyway, characters. At the start of the list, we have a Chronomancer with the Arisen Tyrant enhancement. You aren't going to run this guy because of his devastating firepower or anything like that. His ranged melee attacks aren't anything special, and just like in the Thousand Suns list video, we are looking for characters who are more valuable in their utility than their combat prowess. The Chronomancer makes enemy shooters take a -1 hit, and in your shooting phase, their unit can make a normal move of up to 5 inches if they're not engaged after shooting a target. It's important to note that they won't be able to declare a charge after using that ability. Personally, I found this guy works really well with Immortals running Tesla carbines, as you can get a ton of movement with that assault keyword and the Chronomancer's Chronometron ability. The Arisen Tyrant enhancement allows you to reroll a hit roll of 1 or the entire roll if you teleported onto the battlefield that turn. Using your detachment abilities, you wouldn't usually be able to move after getting set up. That's where the Chronometron ability comes really handy. It allows you free standard movement for your Immortal squad right after they open up. This can get you closer to a point that you can take on your next turn, or into some nearby cover to prepare for the enemy's next shooting phase. For 100 points, the Chronomancer is an invaluable pick. Moving on down the list, we get to the big boys, the Catan. Go watch my latest video on them if you haven't already. This time, we're running the Nightbringer and the Void Dragon. Starting with the Nightbringer, there's not a ton to say. You can see his stats here and do the math yourself, but this guy is pretty much anti-everything. I've yet to lose him in a game, and he carves a huge path of destruction anywhere in the board that he goes. You'll really want to get him into melee to maximize his damage output, because that scythe can easily one-tap heavy vehicles if you roll well, or wipe an entire infantry squad in one turn. At the start of the fight phase, the Nightbringer can use his Drain Life ability. You roll 1d6 for every enemy unit within 6 inches, dealing d3 mortals on 4 up. Couple that with his already disgusting melee capability, and it makes the 255 point cost well worth it. At 270 points, the Void Dragon is another terrifying force of nature to run on this list. His ranged weapons aren't half bad. Spear attack, while extremely short ranged at 12 inches, is anti-vehicle 2 up with AP3 and d6 plus 2 damage. And his Voltaic Storm is a d6 plus 3 blast with sustain 2, making it ideal for clearing large swaths of something like Orc Boys or a looming Space Marine squad. In melee, his Tailblades provide 6 attacks that can chip away at a squad or finish off a larger enemy that's already been hit by his melee spear attacks. That's right, this guy gets extra attacks on his Tailblades. That means you can make an attack with those and his other melee weapon. The strike option, being an anti-vehicle 2-up with the same stats as the range version, saves for the number of attacks you get. At the start of the shooting phase, the Void Dragon can use his Matter Absorption ability on an enemy vehicle within 12 inches. By rolling 1d6 and dealing d3 mortal wounds on a 2-up, he heals the same amount of mortal wounds that he does. This can really come in clutch if he's taking a beating and you don't roll well on your reanimation protocols. If you play your cards right, roll halfway decently, you might be able to keep him alive for longer by taking advantage of that ability. All Catan share 5-up Feel No Pain and 4-up Invuln while also having all damage received, making them extremely difficult to remove from combat. On top of that, you got your teleport abilities from Hypercrypt that allow you to poof them to many different places in the field, giving you a myriad of options for getting an angle on your enemy. There are a ton of points, sure, but in my opinion, they provide an invaluable damage dealing tool for your army and serve as a great distraction that can take a lot of punishment so that your other units can get where they need to be without being pestered by heavy weapons. And that might be the best thing about running Catan in this list. They force your opponent to make difficult decisions. Do they try and take out the Wraiths and the Skorpeks moving on a point? Or do they try to take out the Void Dragon because it's going to be able to kill their heavy units pretty quickly, even though it's not really a threat to their objectives at the time? These guys become instant targets on the board, and it's imperative you come to grips with their imminent demise as early as possible in case you roll like ass. The Overlord is our next little dude, coming in at 85 points. He's not a bad unit, generally speaking. In fact, he's probably one of the more combat-capable leader models on this list that isn't a Star God. I run this guy with a Void Scythe, which isn't a bad melee weapon, if you can actually manage to land more than one attack with it, and a Resurrection Orb. The theme, of course, utility. The Overlord can target his unit with a battle tactic stratagem for 0 CP once per round, and he subtracts 1 from the damage characteristics of attacks allocated to him. And believe me, he will be a target. Running him with a 20-man squad of warriors will allow him to reanimate D6 wounds for his unit rather than the D3, and he can do that at the end of any phase. This comes in handy when you park that mob on a point and lose several dudes to a blast weapon or something like that, as you can do your regular reanimation and then stack it with the D6 from the Resurrection Orb. Be careful though, you can only do that once per battle, so make it count. The Royal Warden comes in with the Hyperspatial Transfer Node enhancement for 70 points total, giving his unit a 6-inch flat advance move. His weapon is essentially a better gauze plaster that the Immortals have, so not a lot to talk about there. With abilities, we're looking at Adaptive Strategy, letting his boys shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which they fell back, and Engrammatic Logic, where once per battle at the start of any phase, he can look at a friendly battle-shocked unit within 12 inches, tell them to stop being such a fucking crybaby, and remove the battle-shock condition from that unit. I run this guy with Immortals, Pack, and Tesla carbines so I can get the maximum usage out of that flat 6-inch advance and assault combo. Lastly, we got the Technomancer. Probably my favorite leader unit. We're going to run him with his Osteoclave Fulcrum enhancement, which gives his unit the deep strike ability and brings his cost up to 100 points. Like most of our leaders on this list, his attacks are mid at best, and utility is the name of the game. With Rites of Reanimation, he gives his unit a 5-up Feel No Pain, which will come in handy later, so remember that. The Technomancer ability allows him to function as an impromptu medic for your units, as at the end of your movement phase, you can select a Necron unit within 12 inches and heal up to D3 wounds. You can only do this once per turn, but that can be a lifesaver, especially if you rolled bad on your reanimation. I like to run this guy with Canoptek Wraiths, and I'll get into that more once we get further down the list. Coming into our battle line units, we've got Warriors and Immortals. Warriors are the backbone of your army. They won't bring down a knight or do anything super heroic, but that's not why you take them. Warriors are good for 2 reasons: sticking power and volume of fire. You can run these dudes in squad of 10 to 20, coming in at 100 and 200 points respectively. You can also run them with either Gauss Flayers or Reapers, but I prefer to run them Flayers. While Reapers give you AP -1 and lethals, they're only 12 inches of range. Flayers grant you 24 inches of range, lethals, and rapid fire 1. Each model gets 1 attack a pop, provided they're not within half range, then they get 2. And you're potentially getting 40 attacks with a full unit. Even though they all hit on a 4-up, that's gonna put out a hefty amount of hate to anyone unfortunate enough to be within that range. Even 20 attacks is still a ton to throw at a unit, and in this list I'm running 2 squads, one at 20 and one at 10. Warriors will often struggle to take down beefier units such as Gravis Armor Marines, but can still chip away at them over time. However, it's incredibly difficult to force a warrior squad off a point, especially if they're in cover and there's about 20 of them. I do highly recommend posting them up in cover whenever possible, as they save on a 4-up, and even rolling at AP -1 can really hurt. So be sure to position them in a way that decreases the amount of punishment they'll take. The caveat to this is that the reanimation allows for a reroll, potentially reviving 3 models. You can always use your teleport rules to pull them off the field for a little bit, and I cannot stress enough the detachment ability of this list. Pulling some units off the field at the end of an opponent's turn can really save their ass. You can use a stratagem to heal them in reserves as well, so be sure to take advantage of that resource as often as you can. You can even get them back right where they were using Cosmic Precision most of the time if you've got the CP to burn, allowing you to poof out of thin air within 3 inches of enemy units. Remember, your arrival rules still apply in reserves, but you can usually use this strategy to get the unit close to where they were before. Moving on to Immortals. If warriors are the backbone, I would consider these guys the muscle. Immortals are the Space Marines of the Necrons. Quite a bit beefier than warriors, Immortals are packing 5 toughness, 3 up saves, and the firepower to back it up. I like to run them with Tesla carbines and get Assault and Sustained 1, albeit at the cost of AP. You can run them in 5 or 10 man squads, putting their points at 70 and 140. I have 2 squads of 10 deep on this list, and they are an excellent volume of fire supplement, 2 attacks each. Their ability, Implacable Eradication, allows them to reroll a wound roll of 1 or the entire wound roll if they're within objective range. You put these guys on cover, on a point, with their higher save, they can be hard to take off, sometimes harder than a group of warriors. But with that being said, let's get into the meat and potatoes with the 600 points left that we have of other units. At the top, we got the Canoptek Doomstalker at 135 points. Probably one of my favorite units on this list. The Doomstalker is a towering War of the Worlds-esque walker that looks cool, does cool shit. Pretty hard to kill with 8 toughness, a 3 up save, 12 wounds, and 4 up invuln. It's also kind of quick with a very solid 8 inches of movement. You might be saying, but Colin, those stats aren't that good. It's not a very tanky unit. You would be correct, sweaty Warhammer nerd, but on this list, we're not pushing this dude up the field. Instead, we're keeping this dude on our back objective within cover so it can melt any idiot that moves within its 48 inch range. Whenever I'm setting up the board with my opponent, I make sure this guy has a clear corridor to fire. Being able to hit almost anywhere on the board with his main gun that hits on a 3 up or a 4 up if you move it for whatever reason, has blast with d6 plus 1 attacks, 14 strength, and AP 3 at 3 damage a pop. The Doomstalker is a great mid to long range deterrent weapon. The Twin Gauss Flare is okay too, I guess. Here's the best part. Its Sentinel Construct ability allows you to hit on a 5 up on an Overwatch, and I can't tell you how great that is. Especially if it's got a clear line of sight on the middle objective, it's going to throw some serious heat and make your opponent think twice about getting into its field of view. It's also relatively safe, as the strategy here is to, again, plop it on your back point within cover to maximize survivability and allow your less long-range units to get where they gotta go and ensure your home objective is secure. Now we're pulling up on the Canoptech Wraiths. 3 models for 110 points. I run these dudes with 3 particle casters, which gives 3 attacks, each with dev wounds, and they have the pistol keyword. Now, that is really important for their strategy. These fellows hold their own quite well in melee, and with a 3 up save and a 4 up invuln, 4 wounds at 2 OC apiece, I like to put them on an objective with a Technomancer for that sweet 5 up feel no pain and deep strike capability. With Cosmic Precision, you can drop this unit almost right on top of the enemy's back objective and just go nuts. The pistol ability of their weapons, coupled with their pretty decent melee, on top of their saves and the feel no pain, make them an incredibly difficult unit to move off a point, especially if your opponent isn't prepared for them. We've got a lot of fantastic characters on our list, but your opponent's probably got some too. Well, Deathmarks are your solution. These guys aren't too crazy, essentially just an immortal with a sniper rifle. They've got a 36 inch range with precision rifles with pretty decent stats, so you can target enemy leaders and eliminate any buffs that they might be giving to their units. They also have this really neat ability called Hyperspace Hunters, which allows them to take a shooting attack at an enemy unit deployed in the reinforcement step from reserves within 18 inches. You can only do that to the deploying unit and if they're an eligible target once per turn, however. These guys have deep strike, so I like to set them sort of between midfield and my back line. This gives them the ability to target any characters that wander into their scopes, but also act as a deterrent along with the Doomstalker to anyone trying to deploy behind my line. I run them 9 deep for 130 points, making them a significantly cheaper precision option than the Shard of the Deceiver. Lokhust Heavy Destroyers are pretty cheap and somewhat effective light AT option at 50 points. I'm only running 1, but that has seemed to be enough. Their stats are pretty decent for what they are, and their Gauss Destructor has heavy, lethals, and it's alright at busting light vehicles like an Impulsor. While the main gun is kind of nice, it only gets 1 shot. On the plus side, it's fairly long range at 48 inches, and with the optimized for slaughter ability, you can reroll a wound roll of 1 against monsters or vehicles. I've gotten a couple kills with this guy, and like I said, he's not a bad light AT option, but it would certainly probably be better if I ran more of them, maybe in a different list. list. I think the Doomstalker fills that AT role a little bit better along with the Catan Shards. However, he serves as a good distraction unit to take the heat off my Doomstalker or the other harder hitting units, because let's face it, he's scary, but he's not that scary. If you lose him, it's really not a huge loss. Skittering towards the end of our list, we have a unit of 3 Skorpekh Destroyers for a nice 100 points. A mildly tough and quick unit. They've got no range attacks, but their melee attacks are nothing to laugh at. These things excel at being a fast attack unit that can get up onto a point and carve out any opposition. With their Whirling Onslaught ability, they can reroll a hit roll of 1 for each model that makes an attack, and if they made a charge move that turn, they can reroll the entire hit roll. Not much else to say about these guys except that they're super cool models and a much needed melee component for this primarily ranged list. Last and probably least, we've got Tomb Blades. Coming in at 75 points for 3 models, these are a cheap and very fast scout unit. Their stats are sort of bad, but you can run them with Shield Veins to give them a 3-up save at the cost of reducing their movement to 8 inches. Nebula Scopes to make their weapons ignore cover, or Shadow Looms to give them stealth. I've tried a bunch of different options for these guys to increase survivability, but I usually just lose them turn 1. As of my last game, I ran them with Nebula Scopes and Shadow Looms, and that seemed to help a little bit. Maybe I'm just bad. Anyway, the weapons are pretty decent. I like to run them with twin Tesla carbines to get all those keywords, and they're not bad against infantry units. They got 9 inches of scout movement and the Evasion Engram's ability, which allows them to make a normal move of up to 6 inches after shooting, provided they're not engaged. Don't worry, they probably won't live that long anyway. These are a really cheap, but honestly, kind of a useful unit, as they'll most likely eat a barrage in place of a unit that actually matters and allows you to get Immortals or Warriors up to the line relatively unscathed. I like to use these guys as feelers to see how my enemy will move around them, and sure, they're a sacrificial lamb most of the time, but they don't do half bad against intercessors or a squad of boys. At the very least, they might be able to humble a unit a little bit if they don't get smacked on turn 1. And there you have it. Those are my list picks for Necron Army. This list does have a pretty weak melee side and relies heavily on having decent shooting phases and positioning strategy. So if you want a list that's gonna make you get really fucking good at the strategy side of 40k, look no further. I'll drop the whole list in the description below. As always, I love the feedback from you guys, and if you're a Necron player, I'd really like to hear what you think. This list has served me pretty well. I've only lost about 3 games with it, largely due to misplays on my part, except for that one where I got my ass handed to me by Black Templars. But drop a like if you like it, subscribe if you really liked it, let me know in the comments what you think, what you might want to see next. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll see you in the next one. Toodles.